And it's great to be. I've been rewarded with the head seat, mate. I am absolutely front and centre. I've got all the controls in front of you. You might be home, and I don't know if you're going to fit back in here, mate, when your time comes.
I am sorry not to be there with you as we start off again, but that's life, isn't it, at the moment?
Yes. Well, I used to spinning out of yesterday. I used to come into either it was a studio or an interview situation and feel like it was a failure if I created a headline. So when I walked out of here at 9:05 yesterday, I thought there might be a few stories out of that. And then when they came and I had a quick look at it, I thought, nah, that's not great. But but I think that's my lot. We need to speak honestly and openly without fear or favour, and that is the responsibility of this role.
Sometimes I think it's such an interesting reality for you. So we have our conversations and then they get interpreted and reported elsewhere. And in a way, you get well, how's this land in the real world beyond the intimacy of what can sometimes be a conversation? Have you ever got used to that?
No, and I think I've made it pretty clear that I'd like to challenge that in some shape or form. And the long form of radio into the short form of a headline is very difficult to, I suppose, you cannot control it because people will take from a conversation what they want. I mean, that happens in day-to-day life, let alone in the sporting arena. So, no, I think we've got to accept that because in the end, maybe the message that you're trying to get across is not the message that resonates either. So I think that's part of it. But to be able to butter up the next day and maybe recast it or to go again is an opportunity that you have when you are in the media. It is not something that you would do that I had the opportunity to do as a senior coach because or in clubland because you're focusing on being as good as you can be at footy and creating the environment and culture there without worrying about maybe how it's perceived.
I listened to you yesterday with the conversation around Tasmania and really the fiscal realities of the now, which you've just come out of. You've watched friends lose jobs. You've watched your program get stripped back through the confines of COVID and the like. The bigger picture, the bigger picture is there today. I think I didn't think that Tasmania would get to the point of announcing that they would build the stadium,
Mm-hmm.
but that's how much they want it. Can we divorce the narrow conversation of the financial realities of the now from the visionary idea of the future, and that's Tasmania in the AFL?
Or if you're happy to unpack that, I mean, I would. The fiscal realities of now are in fact a very real concern. But at what stage do you think that a Tasmanian team would come into the so if the license was granted, say it's granted in 3 months' time, when will it be granted for?
I think it will. So it will now marry up with when would the stadium be built and ready to open. You wouldn't start a new team without the pop of the stadium. So to read what's coming out of Tassie today, that's 2027 on the tightest runway. You might say 2028 as to give yourself a buffer.
And do you think by then they'll be the 19th license?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah. So I can't see. I sort of feel like we've lived through enough of rationalising the competition is just not practical. So the first blowback of even the suggestion that a team might take a joint venture with Tasmania, it's too divisive. It sort of runs counter to how the whole competition is conceived and then how it's sort of pitched into the hearts of people. So I don't think we will lose a team.
Right.
And I suspect we won't lose a team in my time covering the game.
Yeah.
So the only way is then to add.
Okay, and how does, if you take a step back further, how does the funding of, say, an AFLW competition go? If the game itself now, when the profit and loss didn't look great in 21, 22 or 2021 financial year, and we understand that that funding becomes important to facilitate growth, to facilitate innovation. And I think we've actually gone backwards. The football departments have been cut by a third. A mate of mine, Brenton Sanderson, who is no longer a coach after having a great deal of experience, senior coach, assistant coach. I think he won't mind me saying, but he was paid less in his last year of coaching in 2021 than he was in his first year of assistant coaching out of playing 12 years or 15 years earlier. There are realities with that. So what happens with is there enough money to go around as the AFLW competition wants to be expanded and even arguments for equal pay and equal conditions?
So I would probably liken this to the discussion of last week where $1 billion for a redevelopment of the Great Southern Stand, and the blowback comes, well, what about hospitals and schools? Well, there is provision within a state budget for all of these things in their own bucket, as it were. So I think the finances within the AFL industry will rectify itself over the next 2 to 3 years, notwithstanding the damage of COVID. But the game is a behemoth. It's a behemoth in our lives, and it's a behemoth in our media. It's not going to want for money. So the next television deal starts in 2025, and the AFL, I suspect, will have to be a little bit more creative, but I have no doubt that they'll get more money than they have done previously, and then you've got the absolute money within the industry to fund it. So my personal view is you can fund what you choose to fund. So the AFL chooses to fund the Suns and the Giants, and it does this for the reasons of expansion, and then it gets a return off that by staging an additional game, moving from 8 to 9. I think there's a question on the economics of that, but that's the principle. It starts an AFLW competition that gets to 18 teams next year, and the way to advance that is to take the cricket model and wash money through it ahead of time, and then you get the return on your investment, and then you can run the financial realities through what the future of that looks like once it's an 18-team competition and how you marry it up with the men's. And then the club by club it felt to me like when Tassie was being first discussed that there was a demand that it be profitable. Well, why? That's not a demand of every club as it stands right now.
Well, there are a lot of unprofitable
the
clubs at the moment. There are a lot of So there are clubs that are being propped up. We'd have to say they're being invested in, and are still being invested in, sometimes decades after their inception and beyond. So, is that sustainable?
I think it will be sustained as opposed to is it sustainable.
Yes.
So I think the view is we have an economic model where all teams aren't equal. They aren't treated equally in opportunity, so they can't be judged equally in return. That's my view. So the Kennett manifesto during the worst days of COVID, that if you couldn't meet a threshold, you'd be banished from the competition. That's not the reality of what AFL is. So I think if you want to spend... What's the best way to spend the money? I think spending it in Tasmania, setting up a team, the government has committed to fund it per year into eternity, and it's now going to build a stadium. I think the benefits of that will be, as well as goodwill, I think over time they will be tangible. I think they will have a better imprint than the two previous expansion clubs who have gone to regions for totally different reasons to grow the game.
I concede that. All right, so I've got one last question, a what if for you. So the Northern Territory government commit to build a stadium in Darwin.
Yep.
30,000 people. Maybe they put $500 million into it, and they commit to having a team and investing in it beyond. Does it get a team?
So my view, once you get to 19... you have to go to 20.
Correct. Not
the same year, but you have to have a plan to get to 20. So is that the Northern Territory? Is it a third team in Western Australia? I think that's the next piece of work to be done. So if there's a vote in August, in my heart, I sincerely hope the vote is yes. Tasmania can plan for 2027 or 2028. And then the best minds in the AFL can work out, okay, so where's the best location for a 20th team in 2030, so that we have 2 years of the odd number with the buys, and then we complete the picture of the national competition. 10 inside Victoria, 10 outside Torah. You could sort of finally get that to make sense.
It's there's just no stopping, is there? It's forward progress, and I'm sure that anyone that's got a connection with Tasmania would be absolutely excited about the progress that has been made and the prospects ahead. And even to know 5 or 6 years in advance, it does mitigate against those economic concerns, as the government's contribution would. There's a fair bit of excitement that could come with that, I'm sure.
The talent for 20 teams, Bucks. So this is our Indigenous game. I've always found that argument self-defeating. Well, there's not really enough talent for 18 teams. Well, surely there. If that was true, I don't believe it's true, but if it was true, that would be our focus, wouldn't it? Is as the Indigenous game that holds such a place, there should be enough players for 20 lists.
Well, there's a few layers in that. So as coming out of clubland, the concern is now that the provision for the programs for this group of players that we're talking about, club by club, we still have 2/3 of the coaches or 2/3 of the staff from 3 years ago at the end of 2019 that are servicing the same amount of players. So the ratio of coaches or staff to players is a lot lower. A lot higher, really. So there's more players to service. The money for programs has dropped. So the quality of provision on any measure is less than it was 3 years ago. That doesn't mean it's probably more efficient, and it will build and develop. I've got no doubt it'll come back around because you always find a way, but the provision is simply not at the level that it was 3 years ago. Is that going to affect the quality of the on-field product? Now, I don't know. The practice games that I witnessed on the weekend were not that riveting. And the football, it's interesting. There are plenty of stories we can get from it, but the actual football itself, are we seeing the best attributes of our most talented players come to the fore? Is the product engaging the community? And I'd suggest that the jury is still out on that. Is still in on that. We need more time, and we need to. I'm going to be looking really closely at the quality of football this year, and has it actually regressed with the effects of COVID and football departments coming back? I think that something has to give. When we're talking about player lists, I think player lists are too high. Where do you? I think there's just too many players in the competition at the moment.
Yep.
I think we can do with just servicing a senior team. Now, that might be with 35 players rather than with 46, 47. So I think that's a watch this space.
And that spins us into the conversation for the year ahead, which is top-up players. So let me play. This was Gil McLaughlin yesterday on how the AFL is going to navigate the inevitable COVID interruptions. Is that the right attitude?
I think that in a roundabout way, this is the future. And I think there's a lot of things that COVID has brought about that is taking the game towards where it was inevitably going to go. So I think the AFL wanted to cap football department spend. I think they wanted to not only cap it, to bring it down. They wanted to control that aspect of the drain on the resources in the AFL industry, and I think that was done effectively. I actually believe that having top-up players outside of your current list is the way of the future, whether it's COVID-related or not. I think you can have less numbers on your primary list if you have access to a top-up group or a secondary group that you can draw on for cases of injury and I think a mid-season draft, and I think player movement will become more fluid and should become more fluid if you reduce the numbers on lists. So this is the way of the future. Something that's really prevalent. I went to the Frankston Footy Club season launch last night and was told that they have 6 players that they've had to put on a list to be these top-up players. And they're not their youngest 6, their least important 6. They're their best 6. So if you're the Frankston Footy Club and say 4 of those players get ripped out of your team in the middle of the season, it has an impact on their ability to perform. And and to reach the level that they want to reach. And that in a microcosm is what we're seeing. So maybe if we have less on lists, maybe you've got more. The grassroots competition sort of regenerates and improves as well, and that's a very real consideration for people in the community.
What's at the practicality of trying to take a team to an AFL game with a critical mass of top-up players is like, so there is a question of fairness and integrity in here somewhere, but is it one that has to be cast aside? And that's what the NFL was happy to do that. Just bad luck. The BBL was happy to do that to a large degree, and you could measure it. The Melbourne Stars probably missed the finals because the 2 games they had to play when they had to go and get local cricketers to be able to fill out a side. Is that just you have to plough on and we have to park the reservations about it?
Well, you were over there for the Super Bowl. Did you pick up any conversations about it being anything less than a full season with as meritorious as any Super Bowl that would have been played and won?
No.
And yet there were games that were heavily compromised throughout the season. Yep. So it does come back down to the attitude of the combatants. And that's what 2020 was all about. And that was heavily compromised. The games played off 3-4 day breaks in different states, in hubs. West Coast and Fremantle were considered, they had the chance to sleep in their own beds, travelled in, travelled out. But Richmond ultimately won that premiership, and I think it's one of the greatest premierships ever won. There's no tainted or tarnished part of it for me. So I don't think that that's a fact. I think that we can handle whatever situation we find ourselves in.
Did you have to bury at any stage the feeling of, well, this is just not fair? There was a stage in that 2020 season where you were you had that sequence of games in rapid time and you were ravaged by injury, is my memory, and you had to make compromises when you went to a game in Adelaide, is how... how I remember. Did you have to bury the sense of this is not fair?
Yeah, we played, because there was criticisms around the AFLW a couple of weeks ago, how teams had to play 3 games in 13 days, and I think we were saying we were 4 games in 15 days in 4 different states. So there was a fair bit on us, and it's not just in that moment that challenges you. It's actually, does that take the heat out of you? Does that take the energy out of you? We ended up getting smacked by Melbourne the last of those games, and we got criticised heavily for the way that we went about it, or the way that that performance. But we internally we just said, look, we just ran out of gas. Don't worry, guys. Look, let's park that one. We don't want to give it too much energy because we just need to move on to next. And I think that's going to be the coaching challenge going forward. You're going to find yourself in this situation. We might be 5 or 6 or 7 players shy of our best 18 due to COVID. Okay, going into it, you've got to find a reason why you need to and why you can find your best performance and be able to do what needs to be done. But then you're also going to have to wind out of that. And if you don't get it done, well, then you have to go analyse and say, these are the things that really work for us, and these are the things that went against us, but we know we're still progressing towards where we want to go. There's a real coaching challenge with what we're going to see. And a lot of it is around the psyche of the players and the psyche of the club, and in many ways the psyche of your supporter base, to be able to maintain the momentum. And the teams that do that will be the ones that will prosper through this period, and prosper full stop in any situation.